My name is Roger Buck, and this episode is going to be more unusual than many. A bit more raw, crude, personal, even controversial, I think. And if that's true, it's because I've recently been through an intense experience, intense on every level, physically, psychologically, spiritually. And partly that's because, friends, I've spent the last 2 months living in a camper van with my wife, Kim. That's Kim, next to the camping van, nearby the great Holy Cross Abbey in Ireland. But this time, we were living in the van in France, while we had the grace of going on pilgrimage to several of the great Marian sites there. We were at Pontmain in the west of France. We also were able to visit Notre in Paris twice before she was tragically consumed in flames over this last Easter week, Easter 2019. We were actually parked just outside Paris when that happened, listening to the radio in the van, and we've been very deeply marked by that tragedy. We also had the grace of going to the extraordinary, and I do mean extraordinary, chapel of the Rue de Bac in Paris. I mean to say that chapel where in 1830 the Blessed Virgin appeared, bringing something to the world, something I've actually worn around my neck for getting on for something like 20 years now, I think. I mean, of course, the great miraculous medal. So, as I say, all this has been intense. I mean, it's psychologically intense, friends, living in close quarters with anyone for that length of time, even your most beloved. And for me, at least in my physical condition, my age, it was very physically demanding, living and sleeping in such a cramped quarters for so long. So really, there's like a minor mortification and all that for me. But the most important thing is the intensity, the spiritual intensity that I felt in these great Marian sites. And I'm going to say, friends, that I feel changed by this trip, but also changed by a trip I was able to make last year in 2018 to France and Belgium. So there have been two pilgrimages, and I feel like I'm a different man as a result. Now, it's hard to capture that difference. But one thing I can tell you is that I feel that my bond with the Blessed Virgin, the Holy Virgin, has been deepened. I feel a deepening of my devotion to her, and I pray that continues and deepens for the rest of my life. But more than that, there's been an explosion, sometimes quite a jumbled explosion, of insights and clarifications and awareness of the state of this, as I see it, dehumanizing world, and also, dare I say, insights into what my real purpose, my real vocation in this life is. And some of that is leading me in a direction that seems to me more radical, more controversial. Some of that will be in evidence as this video goes on, I think. And in saying all this, in giving the testimony to the power of these places, a sheer power, I'm aware that that not only sounds strange to people of a modern materialistic or rationalist bent, it even sounds strange, I think, to many modern Catholics who, I suspect many of them are more infected than we realize by the Enlightenment, by modern materialism, modern rationalism. Because, friends, the medieval Catholic, the medieval Christians would have no problem with what I'm saying. They knew the power of these places. They went on pilgrimage to them all over Europe. And I think in part, that's because they lived in a world that's far more still and silent. Didn't have all the electronic buzz that we have today. It didn't have the materialistic propaganda. No, Medieval Christians were still and silent and sensitive to these places, and they could feel their power. So that's why, for example, they undertook often arduous journeys to go to sites like the Great Sainte-Chapelle in Paris, which the saint King Louis IX specially constructed to house the great relic of the crown of thorns, visible here in its ornate reliquary. Of course, in recent times, this relic was moved to Notre Dame, all of which is relevant to this video, as you'll see. Also relevant is the fact that since 1830, countless modern pilgrims have flocked to the incredible Rue de Bac, pictured here, of which I'll shortly be saying more. And word is in order too about the site of Pontmain in western France, where in 1871 the Blessed Virgin appeared in the cold night sky to child visionaries holding a blood-red crucifix and appearing tremendously pained. Anyway, having had the grace of spending nearly 2 weeks at Pontmain, I can say the Blessed Virgin has never left that place. Her presence can still be felt there. And friends, everything I'm saying here will be familiar to those of you who know my books or know my other videos, because I speak about pilgrimage a lot there. In fact, for those of you who don't know, here is maybe the place to say that I lived in France 10 years ago. I lived a couple of years there, and yes, my whole faith has been very marked by French spirituality, French Catholicism. In particular, it has been marked by the cult of the Sacred Heart of Jesus, because I was able, while I lived in France, to go more than 20 times on pilgrimage to a little town called Paray-le-Monial, where in 1673 Christ appeared, revealing his Sacred Heart. And I talk about that in episode 4, How the Sacred Heart of Jesus Changed My Life. It's quite a key episode for this channel. So yes, partly, this is a video about the power of pilgrimage, the power of relics and sacred places, and the kinds of changes and insights and realizations that I have found that they can affect in the interior life of the pilgrim. It also features an attempted travelogue, because Kim and I tried to capture some video of me speaking on camera while we were making this journey. But I say attempted travelogue because, frankly, friends, the results are crude, even embarrassingly crude. Partly this is because this was just very impromptu, off the cuff. Kim and I did not have the right equipment. She was just holding a sort of cheap camera in her hands. The weather conditions were often adverse. In fact, there's one shot where you can actually see Kim's finger in the shot because the sun was glaring so much she couldn't see what she was filming. But it's also sort of embarrassingly crude in another way. At least when I got back to Ireland and looked at it, I thought that the results were often like erratic, a bit all over the place, a bit jumbled, as I said. And this is largely because, as I said, things were really exploding in my soul, and I tried to capture them. And I'm not sure that they're going to completely make sense to you. But enough apologies, we'll try to clarify things afterwards. So here I am now, outside the great neo-Gothic basilica that the French built in honor of this apparition of Pontmain. But rather than speak about Our Lady of Pontmain more now, what I really want to do is focus more a bit on what it's like for me to be back in France again after all these years. And really, it's re-evoking so much that was important to me back then. And one of the things that was important to me back then was that I was really able to go beyond the world of my Anglo-American roots, my English and American heritage. I was able to live completely outside of the Anglosphere with its Protestant heritage, and to see the Anglosphere through the eyes of the French and also through the eyes of the Spanish. And let's remember that they don't have any of that Protestant heritage. They are looking at our world, the Anglosphere, from a very different perspective than ours. And so, yes, all this has been at the genesis of much of my thinking, as I've expressed that in my big book, pictured here, called JESU SACRATISSIMUM, which I also started writing in France. Hence, too, the clear French theme to the cover, with its colours of blue, white, and red, and the image of the Sacré-Cœur de Montmartre. So, I'm reconnecting with many of the themes that I wrote about in that book, but I also find myself going deeper into them or seeing things in a new light. So, for example, while I'm in Ireland, in the Anglosphere, I spend a lot of time looking at traditionalist, Catholic traditionalist literature on the internet, forums like the forum run by my dear friend Tracy Tuscheroni, Fish Eaters, and I'm reading English and American traditionalists. But now I'm dealing with French traditionalists, and I see that they often have really very different concerns that could surprise some of my English and American friends. So, for example, they're often very concerned about what they call the hyper-individualism of le monde anglo-saxon, or the hyper-individualism of the Anglo-American world, the Anglo-Saxon world, as they call it, because they see it as having a very pernicious influence on their culture, and they see it as something really going back to the 16th century in England, the English Protestant Reformation kicked off by King Henry VIII. So yes, it's fascinating engaging with French traditionalists and listening to their concerns. I mean, another concern that they're obviously with is the potential threat of Islam to France and Europe, seeing that if present trends were to continue over the next 50 years, over the next 100 years, there is a very significant danger of Islamicization of France. However, again, it may surprise my American and English viewers to know that they're every bit as concerned often with the idea of the Americanization of the world, the Americanization of Europe and French culture. And they often get into sort of bashing America, and that's something that I genuinely don't want to do here. I don't want to enter into that spirit, but I also don't want to ignore their concern. It seems to me that as an English citizen, also as an American citizen, I'm a representative of this Anglo-American culture that is now the dominant culture in the world, this Anglophone culture. And that gives me a certain responsibility to sort of understand and see what my culture is doing to the rest of the world. And to take it seriously, to take seriously how others feel about that. And I do want to listen to the French, because it's like, for us, for we Americans, for we English people, this kind of Protestant heritage is like the air that we breathe. It's normal to us. We're acclimatized to it. But it's not normal to them. They've never gone through this phase, and possibly because they're looking at us from the outside, they can see things that we can't see, and we can learn about our culture and its effects on the rest of Europe. But enough of this for now, because as serious as these things are, and we'll return to them later on, right now I want to turn to something that strikes me as even more serious, more essential, if you like. Hence my symbolic relocation to this scene of the Crucifixion. I'm still here in Pontman, but I'm standing in front of a scene of the crucifixion in blood red, which obviously reflects the fact that this is the way Our Lady of Pontman chose to represent the sacrifice of her son to the visionaries here at Pontman. In part, this symbolic shift represents the fact that I've been in France over Lent and over Easter, where I've been able to participate in the Holy Triduum with the Institute of Christ the King, who celebrated it with such solemnity and dignity. I also had the real grace of being able to venerate the great relic of the crown of thorns at Notre de Paris before she was tragically consumed by flames during Easter week. But as I reflect on all these graces I've been given, there's one word that maybe sums up their fruit the best, the fruit of these graces. That word is seriousness. I feel like I've been led into, I emphasize that word, led into greater seriousness in virtually every area. That includes my personal life. How seriously, for example, do I love my wife, Kim, and take her needs? But it's also seriousness about the state of the world. It's very much seriousness about the state of the church. And it's been seriousness about the mystery of Calvary, the mystery of Golgotha, the mystery of what our Lord Jesus Christ enacted on Golgotha to take away the sins of the world. What does this really mean, this unutterable mystery? Obviously, that's not a question I'm going to answer in words right now, because it is a mystery beyond all words. It is unutterable, it is unspeakable. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that I feel like I was given the grace of being guided into silent contemplation of this mystery like never before. I also want to say that during this time I was guided into contemplating the mysteries of Holy Thursday, the institution of the Eucharist in all its preciousness, and the institution of the priesthood. So now I want to move on soon, but while I'm on this subject of seriousness, I just want to invoke that this is how Our Lady of Pontman appeared to the visionaries: serious, solemn, somber. Indeed, if I recall rightly, one of the visionaries reported that she appeared mortally sad. And this is because Our Lady's heart is pierced by the state of this world, the sorrow of this world. This is not to say that Our Lady is depressed or despairing. Our Lady's heart knows the most profound joys and consolations. But it seems to me that this is what separates the Catholic mystery from so much of the New Age. The New Age, as I've discussed in other videos and in my books, is often about joy, joy, joy. Go for the joy. Which can, if you think about it, really seems something quite egotistical. But with the Catholic mystery, we remember the sin of the world, the sorrow of the world, and in the Catholic mystery, joy and sorrow are inextricably mixed. Right now, I want to get back to my words earlier that I was led into these things, because again, I'm conscious that this is an unusual break from ordinary life, one where I've been allowed to go as a pilgrim to these great European sites of apparitions and relics. And friends, if you ever have the possibility to journey to these sites as a pilgrim, I think you will find, as I have found, that there are extraordinary graces to be had here. Here, I also want to invoke again the chapel of the Rue du Bac in Paris, because when Our Lady appeared there in 1830, she not only brought the miraculous medal, she also promised graces to anyone who would come to the foot of the altar there and pray with faith. And I want to make this very precise. Our Lady spoke to the visionary, in French of course, but this is what she said in English. Come to the foot of this altar. There, graces will be poured out on all those, small or great, who ask for them with confidence and fervor. Graces will be poured out especially on those who ask for them. And I can say, personally, after many visits to that chapel of the Miraculous Medal in Paris, that Our Lady's testimony was completely true. There are amazing, amazing graces to be found at that altar. I went to that altar again and again, begging for grace, and my prayers were answered. But as much as I want to talk about these extraordinary graces, I also very much want to come back to the extraordinary grace of the Eucharist. Because, friends, I said in a recent episode, episode 21, that the Catholic mystery made me human. And that mystery is, of course, centered on the Eucharist. And speaking very personally, I've said this before, I, at any rate, depend on the Eucharist daily. I need daily Mass to keep me human in a dehumanizing world. And there's more I want to say about all these things, but unfortunately, my time at Pontman is finished. I've got to catch the boat to Ireland. Right, friends, complete non sequitur here. Something completely unexpected, something that I wasn't expecting. I'm in Dublin now. Wasn't expecting to film here. But I got off the boat yesterday from France, and I'm with a set of feelings that I want to speak about. I know some of them are going to be controversial. I'm feeling so many things here in Dublin. I'm feeling, on the one hand, the love I have of the city and the love I have of Ireland. But on a more controversial note, I'm struck by the transition from the Francosphere to the Anglosphere. I've been in France for weeks, surrounded by Frenchness, and here I am back in the Anglosphere. And there's one thing that's really hitting me. I'm really hit by the commercialism in Dublin. I'm feeling it in a new way. It's like, I know, obviously, Paris, where I've spent most of my time, is one of the great capitalist centres of the Western world, but somehow here in Dublin, here in the Anglosphere, it's like the commercialism is in my face. It's like hitting me, like, look at me, look at me, look at me, buy me, buy me, buy me. It's like trying to grab your attention, seize your attention. And, friends, I'm not trying to knock Ireland, because, and this is where this is going to get very controversial, I cannot help but feel that this has more to do with the Anglo-Saxon world than what true Irishness is. And there are things that I feel about this Anglo-Saxon world. It's like Napoleon famously said, England is a nation of shopkeepers. Why am I invoking Napoleon? I guess it's because as a Catholic and as a student of European history, English history, French history, I've always felt that Napoleon was onto something important there. That there was something about the British Empire that was built on commerce, built on this English genius for being shopkeepers, and somehow the French were never quite as good at commerce or capitalism as the English were. And friends, that's what I'm feeling here in Dublin. I feel like the spirit of the English, the spirit of the Anglo-Saxon world has invaded this culture. This is very controversial stuff, I know, but I'm going to say this. I've also spent time going round the old churches of Dublin, feeling the vestiges of the Catholic piety, remembering the Catholic world that Dublin once honoured so deeply. And yesterday, friends, my heart was breaking. My heart was breaking as I felt this clash between the world of commerce, materialism, capitalism, and this old Catholic world that Ireland once used to be so oriented to. Today, I've regained my equilibrium. I'm not quite as upset as I was yesterday, but you know, friends, I'm not sure that's a good thing. So, friends, I'm back in Ireland, I'm looking at this footage, and I'm thinking some of you may be wondering, what the heck is Roger on about here? What does he mean by the extraordinary power of the Rue de Bac? Or French traditionalists vigorously objecting, and I do mean vigorously, to Anglo-Saxon hyper-individualism. And to try answering those questions, I've come to the conclusion that the only way forward is to keep being very personal, really actually uncomfortably personal. And to that end, I'm going to start with the observation that every human life can be seen as a series of problems or even a series of crises that the human being tries to resolve. But if one is a sincere Christian or Catholic, it's not enough just to resolve them in any old way, like earn lots of money and get rich quick and throw money at the problem or have lots of sex or goodness knows what. No, one tries to address one's problems, meditating on the divine will, asking what will honor the Lord. And it may even be that one is taken into really asking, why has one been given this set of problems, or what is one's real vocation in life? And without getting too personal, I will say that it is in something of that spirit that Kim and I set off on this pilgrimage with the intention, above all, of going to the Rue de Bac in Paris, because numerous times in France in the past we found so deeply that our prayers had been answered there. So maybe that helps explain why Kim and I really went to that altar in a spirit of supplication. Like I said earlier, begging grace. We also begged grace for friends. I begged grace as well for every subscriber to this channel. And it seems that for our own issues that we were begging grace for, that grace did flow in striking, unexpected, and profound ways. Now, to explain that, I want to say something about prayer, because I've found that prayer in certain places in the world, I mean the Rue de Bac, I mean Paray-le-Monial, I also mean the Chapel of the Holy Blood in Belgium, which I'll speak about another time. I've found that prayer and contemplation goes deeper, effortlessly deeper in those places. So, in my ordinary day-to-day life, friends, I often find prayer and meditation difficult. But when I'm in these places, it's like there's a presence there, facilitating the prayer. My prayer becomes effortlessly deeper and deeper, and it seems to me creative, that creative answers to problems have flowed from the prayer in the chapels of Paray and the Rue de Bac, flowed in ways that have completely changed my life. As I said before in the Paray episode. But this time in Paris, it wasn't only in the Rue de Bac that I experienced prayer like this. Because something happened also at Notre Dame in Paris before she burned, something that feels very creative to me, during a solemn ritual during Lent, where pilgrims like myself and Kim came to venerate the crown of thorns. Let me try to explain what happened. We were there for maybe an hour, where the relic was exposed for veneration. And each pilgrim was given a chance to come up to the relic for a brief encounter. And really, that hour of veneration marked my whole time in France. In fact, it so marked me that I found myself going up to confession right after I had been in this ritual of veneration of the relic. And it's very difficult to describe why I did that or how it marked me. But if I had to put it briefly, I would say that something was really impressed on my soul during that hour, and it entailed an awareness of what I might call a subtle but serious pattern of negligence on my part over many years. And I found myself in the weeks afterwards pondering this experience that so marked me. I found myself thinking of our Lord's parable of the talents, in which the master gave talents to his servants, but one of them neglected these. He simply buried them in the earth. In other words, he was negligent. And all of this led me into a pattern of reflection and contemplation in the weeks ahead, particularly in the extraordinary prayer that I found in the Rue de Bac, but also later on afterwards in Pontman. I mean, Pontman was not like the Rue de Bac. It did not generate that extraordinary silence in prayer, but it was still very, very special. And yeah, I found myself in the midst of this really with a contemplation of the gifts that the Lord, Jesus Christ, the Master of Love, has given me. And these gifts, if you like, fall into two categories. There's a category of what's universally available, or universally available to Catholics anyway, and that is the sacraments of the Church, born through the priesthood, given through the priesthood, which is at the root of what I was saying about Holy Thursday in the video footage earlier. But then there's also the gifts and graces that He's given to me, in particular, the particular gifts. And here I think I'm going to invoke the gift of contrast. What do I mean, the gift of contrast? Well, I've been getting at that on the video earlier. So I spoke about being in Dublin after having the gift of experiencing Paris and really feeling a contrast which generated consciousness, which generated insights. Because this is what contrast does, doesn't it? It generates awareness. And there's other kinds of contrast in my life. So I've lived the whole contrast between the Anglosphere and the Francosphere, because I've lived in America, Britain, and Ireland on the one side, but I've also lived in France. So I have the gift of that contrast. Or there's the contrast I mentioned of American traditionalists and French traditionalists. And I have that because I've also been given the gift of the opportunity to come to understand French. Now, in saying all this, I don't want to say that this is special in any sense. It's just special to me. I mean, you, friend, will have a very different set of gifts and graces. I mean, maybe you're a housewife in, I don't know, Kansas City or Nevada. Maybe you've been rooted there your whole life, and you've raised 7 children and done it beautifully. And you will have a completely different set of gifts and graces than I have. But I have these gifts and graces, and I was really forced to ask, what am I doing with them? What have I done with them? And in saying all this, now I'd like to invoke an inspiring organization in France called Renaissance Catholique, which brings together French traditionalists, also French intellectuals, to explore various issues, including the one raised here, La France doit-elle disparaître, which might be translated, France, must she disappear? And this sort of thing heightens my awareness of the contrast with Anglophone traditionalists, because it's hard to imagine Catholic traditionalists in Ireland, for example, asking questions like, Ireland, must she disappear? A theme we'll get back to, at any rate. Renaissance Catholique is one of the centers of French traditionalism that I'm drawing from here. Also, the inspired efforts of the wonderful Institute of Christ the King, and other places as well. And that's where I'm finding things like the French concern for the destruction of their culture by Anglo-Saxon hyper-individualism. And, I'm aware that some viewers won't really even maybe know what the French mean by that. I mean, if you haven't lived outside the Anglosphere, you might think, well, aren't the French just as individualist as the English? And the brief answer is no. French society, to put it very briefly, is still governed, even very secular French society, by what you could call great collective patterns of tradition and rhythm. I'll give you one short example of what I mean. In France, when I lived there 10 years ago, all the shops were still shut on Sunday. Sadly, that's begun to change with the recent socialist government of François Hollande. But even if you were a secular, Frenchman or Frenchwoman, you went and stayed at home with your family on Sunday. And all the shops, at least in the towns, maybe not Paris, were also shut between 12 and 2 o'clock, because the French went home and ate with their families. So there's this collective rhythm that governs French life. In fact, I'll give you a little story here of what I mean. I remember one time I was in Paray-le-Monial. Doesn't matter if it was Paray, it could have been any French town, but it was Paray. And I was on the street, and I just had a little street scene just come up right in front of me. I saw it there on the street. And there were 2 American tourists there, and maybe pilgrims. And they were old. It was an old lady and her husband. And this old lady was looking at her husband, and she was saying, the shops, or the stores probably, the stores are all shut. And there was like this bewildered, painful expression on her face. And I had to think that nothing in her 70 years or so had prepared her for a society where the shops all shut at lunchtime. Even, she would have probably grown up in a more traditional America in the 40s or 50s, but nothing prepared her for this. It was painful. It was bewildering. And I've never forgotten that. And obviously related to all of this is that, as the French would see it anyway, in the Anglosphere, there's been a far greater tendency for commerce and capitalism to destroy traditional patterns of life. So, there's far more in the Anglosphere. It's the case that you can buy whatever you want, whenever you want, maybe 2 o'clock in the morning. Because that's good for capitalism. It's good for the economy. And generally, American conservatives and traditionalists will be in favor of commerce and capitalism. But that's much less the case with French traditionalists, because there's as I see it anyway, there's a much greater awareness that capitalism actually destroys tradition. And this is the kind of thing I was getting at earlier when I evoked Napoleon calling England a nation of shopkeepers, suggesting that even back then, the English were somehow geared to shopping in a way that other nations were not quite so geared. Now, of course, I'm aware that's a very pejorative, dismissive comment by Napoleon, but nonetheless, it still reflects something, I think, in French society, over centuries, really, rightly or wrongly, there has been a tendency of the French to perceive the English as more pragmatic, more utilitarian, more commercial, and that's, linked often in their minds to the spirit of Protestantism. And yeah, they see, rightly or wrongly, that there's a greater willingness to sacrifice culture, art, beauty, to the purely commercial, pure pounds and pence. And again, rightly or wrongly, you can begin to understand that if you've lived in the Francosphere, if you've lived in the Anglosphere, and you traveled there. I mean, I was in Britain just before going to France this time. I was actually in London, right at the heart of the city, in places like Piccadilly Circus, pictured here. And yes, of course, I am emphasizing this overpowering crass commercialism for a reason. Anyway, coming into Paris, I couldn't help but feel again the contrast between these two great cities. Now, as I said in the video footage we shot in Dublin, I know well that Paris is also one of the great world centers of capitalism. But it does seem to me like the commercialism is a little more restrained there, often restrained by law. There's a different spirit there. And it's hard to tell you what I mean, friends, in a very short space of time. I think that I need to do a whole video about this. But very briefly, I might say something like this. In Britain and America, there's much more a sense of culture being dominated by giant global brands, also chain stores. Everywhere I looked in Britain, there were just chain stores everywhere. Whereas in France, there was still a sense of smaller shops, often owned by traditional proprietors, less conglomeration. It all felt, if I'm honest, less crass. Now, Paris, is historically, it's a city of great beauty, subtlety, delicacy. I know there's a very beautiful British spirit. I felt that romantic British spirit as well, and I cherish it. But it does seem to me that the British have been more willing to shortchange themselves, shortchange their beauty and their culture, and sell out, if I'm honest. And I'm saying all this for a reason. I want to try to explain to you the things I was getting at when came into Dublin, and really the pain that I felt in Dublin. Because, friends, I was very conscious walking around Dublin that even 50 years ago, the spirit of Dublin would have been very different. Yes, 50 years ago, a different spirit inhabited Dublin, a spirit permeated by Catholicism. Yes, also a spirit of national pride in the Irish culture. And this is something I'm very conscious still persists very much in France. The French, whether on the left or whether they're on the right, they don't want to be swallowed up by le monde anglo-saxon, Anglo-Saxon hyper-individualism. They want to preserve their French culture. And frankly, that's really getting lost in Ireland. It's like a different spirit. The original Catholic spirit of Dublin has been obliterated, and it's been replaced by a different spirit. And all of this was very painful to me that first day in Dublin. In fact, at the end of that day, I got on the train with my wife, Kim. Ironically, I got on at Pearse Station, named after the Irish revolutionary Patrick Pearse, whose strange, highly improbable story we told in episode 18, trying to point to the mysterious, possibly mystical depths of a sensitive, even shy, devoutly Christian schoolteacher who was astonishingly transformed into leading an impossible revolution against the mightiest empire on earth, which revolution then miraculously succeeded. Anyway, I got onto that train with Kim in a lot of pain, and I ended up saying something to Kim, spoken from that pain. And I'm going to tell you, friends, what I said to her on that train, coming out of Pierce Station. And I'm going to tell you it being very aware that it's going to sound simplistic, excessive, maybe outrageously dewy-eyed, starry-eyed, naive, even mental to many, maybe most Irish people today. But here is what I said. I said to her, I feel like the noblest people in Europe have been colonized by the Anglo-American world. Okay. Friends, I don't repent of saying that. It expresses something that I feel very deeply after 8 years of living in this country. Of course, I'm aware that a complex situation cannot be summed up in a simple sentence like that. I'm aware that the Irish are dark, broken, fallen, just like every other people on this planet, and, more dark and fallen than we're ever likely to see this side of the grave. I'm also aware that the Irish have bought into, hook, line, and sinker, this liberal culture imported from the great Anglosphere centers of power, London, New York, Hollywood. I'm aware they bought it. But after 8 years of living here, I still say I see unusual, very unusual qualities in the Irish. This is something that emerges out of prayerful reflection on the Irish, on the contrasts I see in my life, having traveled back and forth between different countries, lived in different countries, prayerful reflection on Irish history. And I think it's time that I start saying more about this on these videos. I've already spoken about it a lot in my books. But yeah, in the next episode, I'm at least going to start saying something about what I see in the Irish. Right now, I think I'll just say something, though, brief. As horrified as I was, as I've said on these videos, by the abortion referendum last year in Ireland in 2018, we still have to remember that that abortion referendum happened 50 years later. The Irish approved abortion 50 years later than the British did in 1967. And they did so after having been bombarded by all kinds of money and propaganda, emerging from the great liberal, globalist, capitalist centers of the world. To me, it still says something that despite all this bombardment, they held out against the plague of abortion for so long. This is a subject that I go into in episode 16, which is called The Indoctrination of Ireland and the World. This episode was born from years of pondering the Irish situation, and it's probably the most important I've done so far. And it's not just about Ireland. It's about the sheer power of progressive propaganda everywhere. So yes, what I said to Kim on the train that day was not just born of pain, it was born of years of reflection, as reported in episode 16, about what liberalism and capitalism have done to Ireland. It's born of taking in the French traditionalist perspective that I've been speaking about. And really, I also think that it was born of the fruits of this pilgrimage, where I feel like I was led into a more contemplative and silent way of looking at the world. And I want to say just a few last things about the fruits of pilgrimage before we close, because I've been emphasizing how much these fruits are to do with these holy places in the ruins of Christendom, these holy places in France and Ireland. We have Knock in Ireland. But it's not just that these places are repositories of grace, although they are. incredible grace. But clearly, Kim and I went into this pilgrimage praying every day, and that's important. We also went to daily Mass. And if you ever enter into a pilgrimage like this, friend, I would encourage you to do the same. Go to daily Mass. It will affect changes in your consciousness if you're not going to daily Mass already. And yeah, I would even say, you know, abstain from alcohol if you drink alcohol. This will also have an effect on your pilgrimage. And I'm going to talk about something else as well. Kim and I were in the fortunate position of being able to abstain almost entirely from the internet. We didn't carry any kind of smartphone. I don't even own such a thing. Any kind of mobile device connected to the internet. And not everyone can do that, of course. It was a grace that we could do this. But I find something happens when I'm disconnected from the internet, when I'm not being bombarded all the time. For me, it's kind of bliss to not have that constant stimulation that the internet creates. I find myself falling into prayer, deep prayer, more easily just as a result of being disconnected from the internet. And all these kinds of things, daily Mass, prayer, abstinence, help facilitate a different means of consciousness, a different way, help facilitate the extraordinary graces that we found above all at the Rudebach and with the crown of thorns, and also help to become more aware of these contrasts that I've been speaking about. And I just want to bring in one last contrast, just touch on it. I said that in Paris we had the enormous grace of daily Latin Mass with the Institute of Christ the King, sovereign priest, founded by Monsignor Gilles Vac. And in Pontmain, after we left Paris, there was no daily Latin Mass. Actually, there was no Latin Mass at all. And the contrast between the two Masses was very evident. In fact, at one point, Kim and I had to suffer through an almost Pentecostal-like Mass, with the priest bellowing and hollering at his congregation, trying to whip up the crowd. It was very painful, friends. Now, to be fair, not all Pont Masses were like this. Nonetheless, there was a tendency in that direction, and I think this is the problem with the new Mass. It's the problem of the slippery slope. The tendency is there to open the door to irreverence. It first may be just a little bit of irreverence, and then a bit more, and then a bit more, and why not go whole hog with it once you've opened the door to that irreverence? And this is one of the reasons why the Institute of Christ the King is such an inspiration for me. It's an inspiration in other ways. I'd like to actually pay tribute to the spirit of charity that flows through the Institute. It's conspicuous in a way that it's not always conspicuous elsewhere. And also the spirit of fidelity to Rome, of Romanitas. And speaking of Romanitas, I'm very aware that Ireland once looked to Rome in a way that she now looks to London or New York, or to a lesser extent, Brussels, a much lesser extent, I think, personally. And I think this Romanitas of the Institute, along with its reverence, is very significant for Ireland as elsewhere. This is an Institute Mass here in Ireland, and it reveals not only something of what Ireland has lost, but also why I think the Institute has an important, inspired work in helping to save the soul of this country. So, I wanted to point to the immense treasure that the Institute of Christ the King is offering Ireland and elsewhere in the world, as well as point to other currents of French traditionalism like Renaissance Catholique that seem very important to me. And in saying that, there's something that's hitting me more and more deeply. It's something very obvious when you think about it, and it's this. It's that Irish Catholics, at least Catholics of a conservative or traditional orientation, will inevitably be tuned in to what English traditionalists or American traditionalists or conservatives have to say more than they will be tuned into France. And it's not that there are not incredible gifts that are coming to us from the world of Anglo-American conservatism and traditionalism, but the French have something to offer as well. France is the home of the original counter-revolution, and I'm finding that what France has to offer is often just a bit different in ways that I think are important. So, another example, I was gratified in studying the French conservative scene to see how much awareness there is of what we're doing to the climate, what we're doing to the environment, because conserving the climate and the environment is a part of being conservative as well. And often I don't see as much awareness of that in the Anglo-American world as in France. I'm going to be honest with you, friends, that's an understatement. It's a little ironic understatement. But yes, I've wanted in this video to direct, in however small a way, Irish attention to French traditionalism, because I think there are important things there that are often being missed by Anglo-American conservatism, which again is not to say that English and American Catholic and conservative voices are not helping this country enormously, because they are helping enormously. But I feel like France has something to balance certain tendencies. I want to point to it, and I want to point one last time as well to Our Lady's tears, because Our Lady appeared in great pain, not only in Pontman, but in La Salette and other places too. So yes, it seems to me that Our Lady is weeping, still weeping for this world. She's weeping above all for the destruction of the faith, and the abyss of materialism that has led to, an abyss of meaninglessness, an abyss of despair, of enemy, of people seeking refuge in sex, in shopping, in consumerism, commercialism. She's weeping for the environment, for how we're pumping the environment full of poisons, whether it's pesticides or carbon dioxide, and the consequences that that is going to have for countless forms of life on this planet, not just human beings. And she's weeping for global liberalism, including economic liberalism, which I tried to very much explain in episode 16, which is, again, a very key episode for this channel. Alright, friends, we're almost finished, except to say that normally at this point in the video I promote my own books, but instead we're going to promote a book by my friend Charles Coulombe. The book is called A Catholic Quest for the Holy Grail, and what might not be immediately obvious from this title is that in large measure it's very much a book about some of the themes I've been speaking about in this video. A book about pilgrimage, a book about the miraculous and holy sites of European Christendom. Kim and I actually took this book in the van with us on both of our recent travels to France because it was a complement to our pilgrimage. And I'm not sure, it's just a wonderful book. I mean, I have loved all of Charles's books that I've read, but I think this is possibly my favorite. Charles just writes with joy, he writes with erudition, and he writes with such faith in the Catholic mystery and in the glory of Christendom. So, we'll give a link down below to the book, or rather to my review of the book at our site. And yeah, in closing, I'll just say I hope the videos will be coming out rather more quickly in the future. I do find them painstakingly hard to do, which is why I'm much slower than I'd ideally like. I also think we may be moving, as I say, in some more controversial directions, because that's what's emerged for me during this time. I do say I feel changed by this time. I feel, dare I say it, that I have a greater sense of my own calling, my own vocation, based on the specific type of graces that God has led me to, living in these different countries and being enabled to make these pilgrimages. Pilgrimages, I'd say, through the embers of Christendom. Because what I've found is that these embers are not dead. They are warm, alive, glowing, filled with fire, spiritual fire. And if we're to have any hope at all in the fullness of time, I don't say anytime soon, but in the fullness of time of rekindling Christendom, a world ordered to Christ, we cannot ignore these incredible places that have been given to us by the grace of God and often through, the Blessed Virgin Mary. We cannot bypass the great holy sites I've been talking about in this video. Places like Pontman, Notre Dame of Paris, Sainte-Chapelle, the extraordinary chapel of the Rue de Bac, or the equally extraordinary chapel of the apparitions of the Sacred Heart at Paray-le-Monial, or places I hope to talk about in the future, like Lourdes, or Knock in Ireland, or the Chapel of the Holy Blood in Belgium. Alright, I'll just say, friends, if you appreciate what I'm trying to do here and you'd like to help me make it more visible to other members of the public, I would be very grateful if you'd consider hitting the like button, subscribing, or even sharing it on platforms like Facebook or Twitter. I'd be very grateful to you. But that's all I'll say for now, except thank you for listening, and God bless you.